The tragic case of Betty Gore is one of the most shocking stories of murder in the late 20th century, encapsulating friendship, betrayal, and brutal violence. Set in the peaceful suburban neighborhood of Wiley, Texas, the case involves two seemingly ordinary women: Betty Gore, a quiet, introverted schoolteacher, and her friend and neighbor Candy Montgomery, a vivacious and popular housewife. What begins as a simple friendship quickly unravels into a dark and complex tale of illicit love affairs, pent-up emotions, and a bloody murder that leaves one woman dead and another at the center of one of the most sensational criminal trials in Texas history. Betty Gore was born Betty Pomeroy in the early 1950s. She grew up in Kansas and later moved to Texas, where she pursued a degree in education. Described as an intelligent, responsible, and caring individual, Betty became a teacher at a local school and was well liked by both her colleagues and students. She married Alan Gore in 1970, and together they had two daughters, Alisa and Bethany. By all appearances, Betty and Alan had a stable and happy marriage, and Betty was deeply devoted to her family. However, behind closed doors, Betty struggled with mental health issues, including depression and anxiety. The pressure of being a full-time mother and teacher, combined with Alan's frequent business trips, left her feeling overwhelmed and isolated. She longed for stability and emotional support, but Alan, though a kind and gentle man, was often unavailable due to his work commitments. As a result, Betty began to feel lonely, and cracks began to show in the seemingly perfect veneer of her life. Candy Montgomery, born Candace Wheeler in 1950, was in many ways the polar opposite of Betty. Outgoing, charismatic, and always the life of the party, Candy was a well-known figure in the Wiley community. She was married to Pat Montgomery, an engineer, and they had two children. Like Betty, Candy was a mother and homemaker, but she found the domestic life dull and unfulfilling. She craved excitement, stimulation, and a sense of adventure, something she felt her marriage lacked. Candy and Betty became friends after meeting at the local Methodist church, where they both participated in various social and religious activities. They lived in the same neighborhood and occasionally spent time together with their families. Despite their differences in personality, they appeared to enjoy each other's company, at least on the surface. However, beneath the surface, tensions and secrets were brewing, particularly involving an illicit affair that would soon spiral out of control. In 1978, Candy Montgomery initiated an extramarital affair with Alan Gore, Betty's husband. Their affair began after Candy became attracted to Alan during a church volleyball game. Candy, feeling neglected and bored in her marriage, saw Alan as a potential source of excitement. Alan, for his part, had been feeling emotionally distanced from Betty, whose depression and mood swings made their relationship increasingly strained. Thus, when Candy made the first move, Alan was willing to reciprocate. The affair was carefully planned and executed. Candy and Alan set strict ground rules for their relationship to avoid emotional entanglements, limiting their meetings to secret rendezvous at motels during Alan's business trips. Despite their intentions to keep things casual, Alan began to feel guilty and conflicted about betraying Betty, while Candy grew frustrated with the constraints of the affair. Eventually, after several months, Alan decided to end the affair, realizing that he wanted to work on his marriage with Betty. Betty was unaware of Alan's affair with Candy, though she suspected that something was amiss in their marriage. She had confronted Alan about his emotional distance, but he assured her that there was nothing wrong. In the summer of 1980, Betty found herself feeling particularly anxious and stressed, largely due to Alan's increasing absence and her own struggles with motherhood. On the fateful day of June 13, 1980, Betty was at home with her youngest daughter, Bethany, while Alan was away on a business trip. Unbeknownst to Betty, Candy was planning to stop by the house that morning to pick up Elisa's swimsuit for a church activity. What was intended to be a brief, neighborly visit quickly escalated into a deadly confrontation. According to Candy's later testimony, when she arrived at the Gore home, Betty confronted her about the affair with Alan. Candy admitted to the affair, but assured Betty that it had ended long ago. Betty, however, was enraged. She reportedly stormed off and returned with a 3-foot-long axe. What happened next is the subject of much debate, but the outcome was undeniably brutal. Betty Gore was struck with the axe 41 times, resulting in her death. After the murder, Candy calmly left the Gore residence, leaving Betty's body behind in a pool of blood. Baby Bethany, who was in her crib at the time, was left alone in the house for hours. When Alan tried to reach Betty later that evening and received no response, he grew concerned and asked neighbors to check on her. After repeated attempts to enter the house, neighbors finally gained access, discovering the horrific scene inside. Betty's body was found in the utility room, her face and body so mutilated by the axe that it was initially difficult to identify her. The scene was one of unimaginable violence, with blood splattered across the walls and floor. Baby Bethany, miraculously unharmed, was found crying in her crib, having been left unattended for hours. The brutal nature of the crime sent shockwaves through the quiet community of Wiley, and the police immediately launched an investigation. At first, Alan Gore was considered a possible suspect, but he was quickly ruled out when it was confirmed that he had been out of town at the time of the murder. Suspicion soon turned to Candy Montgomery, particularly after it was revealed that she had been the last person to see Betty alive and that she had engaged in an affair with Alan. Candy was brought in for questioning, and although she initially denied any involvement in the murder, the evidence against her began to mount. A bloody thumbprint found at the scene was matched to Candy, and after several days of intense questioning, she finally confessed to killing Betty, though she claimed it had been an act of self-defense. Candy Montgomery's trial for the murder of Betty Gore began in October 1980, and it quickly became a media sensation. The case was not only shocking due to the brutal nature of the crime, but also because of the suburban setting and the fact that both women were seen as ordinary housewives. Candy's defense team, led by attorney Don Crowder, argued that the killing was an act of self-defense. According to Candy's testimony, Betty had confronted her with the axe and threatened to kill her. Candy claimed that she had tried to leave, but Betty had blocked her path. In the ensuing struggle, Candy managed to wrestle the axe away from Betty and, in a panic, struck her repeatedly to defend herself. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture, arguing that the sheer number of blows, 41 in total, indicated a cold-blooded, premeditated murder, not a frenzied act of self-defense. One of the most sensational aspects of the trial was Candy's use of hypnosis to recall the details of the murder. Under hypnosis, she claimed that she had experienced a flashback to a traumatic event from her childhood, in which she had been scolded for making noise. This memory supposedly triggered an unconscious rage that led her to continue striking Betty even after she was no longer a threat. In a surprising turn of events, the jury found Candy Montgomery not guilty of murder. The verdict shocked the public, many of whom believed that Candy had gotten away with murder. The jury accepted the defense's argument that Candy had acted in self-defense, and she was acquitted of all charges. After the trial, Candy Montgomery moved away from Texas and attempted to rebuild her life. She reportedly changed her name and distanced herself from the media spotlight. Alan Gore, left to raise his 2 daughters alone, eventually remarried, but the shadow of Betty's murder continued to haunt him and his family for years. The case of Betty Gore's murder raises many questions about human nature, mental health, and the darker side of suburban life. At its core, the case is a tragic story of two women whose lives intersected in a fatal way, one seeking emotional stability and the other searching for excitement. Betty's mental health struggles, Alan's emotional withdrawal, and Candy's desire for adventure all contributed to a situation that spiraled out of control. The trial itself highlighted the complexities of the legal system, particularly in cases involving self-defense and psychological trauma. Candy's use of hypnosis to recall repressed memories was controversial, and many legal experts criticized the trial for its reliance on unproven psychological techniques. The fact that Candy was acquitted, despite the overwhelming evidence of excessive violence, remains a point of contention for many. The case of Betty Gore and Candy Montgomery has left a lasting impact on popular culture. The story has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and television adaptations, including the recent miniseries Love and Death, which dramatizes the events leading up to the murder. The case has become a symbol of the darker undercurrents of suburban life, where appearances can be deceiving, and where seemingly ordinary people can be driven to commit extraordinary acts of violence. In many ways, the Betty Gore murder case serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of repression, isolation, and unaddressed emotional trauma. It is a reminder that beneath the surface of even the most idyllic communities, dark secrets can fester and lead to tragic consequences. The tragic murder of Betty Gore at the hands of Candy Montgomery is a story that continues to fascinate and disturb people to this day. It is a tale of friendship, betrayal, and the fragile nature of human relationships. While Betty's life was tragically cut short, the case serves as a powerful reminder of the complexities of the human psyche and the devastating consequences of unspoken emotions and unresolved conflicts.